The stick grenade Model 24 is one of the most used grenades in history. It appeared in the First World War, and its simplicity, versatility, and great destructive power made it remain in the two world wars virtually without any change. It is one of the most recognized grenades in history, and according to many experts, it was the ultimate grenade. Today, we will compare the M24 grenade aspect by aspect with the grenades that were most used by the strongest nations of the Second World War, particularly those of the United States and the Soviet Union, in order to definitively determine if the M24 grenade was exceptionally good, as everyone remembers, or just an overrated grenade. The most used grenade by the United States was the Mk2 fragmentation grenade, or more commonly known as pineapple for its characteristic shape. It was so produced and had such an impact on popular culture that when you think of a grenade, you probably think of the Mk2. It was a fragmentation grenade, so its lethality lay in the fragments of the casing that were scattered by the explosion of the inner charge. The explosion of the inner charge released fragments of the thick casing in all directions, creating a 100% lethality radius at 4 meters and could spread shrapnel more than 15 meters, making it absurdly effective in open areas. The Americans also had concussion grenades, but these were not used as much as the Mk2 fragmentation grenade. In contrast to the Mk2, we have the German M24 grenade, or as the German soldiers popularly used to call it, the potato masher. It was a much bulkier concussion grenade, and it really had a greater destructive power. Being a concussion grenade, it really had a weak casing that, when exploded, generated very little shrapnel. So its lethality lay more in the explosion itself of the grenade, by generating a large shockwave that caused serious damage to tissues. The Germans also produced the M39, or more commonly known as the egg grenade, which were fragmentation or concussion grenades that were used in smaller quantities than the M24 grenades. Both grenades, M24 and Mk2, have abyssal differences in design, and this is so. Since both grenades were made with different focuses, the German M24 grenade was an offensive grenade designed to assault enemy trenches in World War I, while the Mk2 fragmentation grenade was a defensive grenade, which served more to stop the enemy advance, and these factors greatly affect the design of both grenades and, of course, their intrinsic characteristics. In open areas, the American Mk12 grenade had more defensive factors because when it was thrown, all the infantry in the vicinity had to take cover, stopping the advance of both the enemy and their own, while the M24 grenade had a fair action area to be thrown in defensive positions and not necessarily stop the Allied advance, also greatly reducing friendly fire. So we could say that one was made to stop the advance of the infantry and the other to facilitate it. This is a point in favor for both, as each had its specific role. Indoors, the Mk2 grenade was really lethal, as the shrapnel could bounce off the corners and still be partially lethal. However, the M24 was even more lethal because the shockwaves were contained by the interior walls, causing a higher probability of damage to the soldiers' tissues, even behind cover. This is a point in favor for the M24. Other different factors that we can see in the mentioned grenades is how far you could throw them. You could throw the M24 very, very far, much further than an American Mk2 grenade. A man with a good arm could throw an Mk2 25 or 30 meters away. The German M26 could be thrown 35 or even up to approximately 40 meters. Throwing grenades further allowed you to attack from further away, from safer positions. The secret of the German M24 grenade to be thrown further was literally the stick that made up its body. With the weight concentrated in the head of the grenade, when the grenade was thrown, it received a superior impulse. This was a point in favor for the M24. Also, if we observe the operation of each one, many differences, the ignition of the M24 was quite simple. Under the grenade and the handle was a cap that had to be turned, and when turned inside, it had a string that after it was praised, the fuse of the grenade started, and after 4 seconds, it ended burning, the powder producing a big explosion. The Mk2 grenade, on the other hand, was much safer. It had a quite simple operation that consisted of 2 safeties, a pin that locked the main safety, and when removing the pin, the main safety was locked by our hand. Then when throwing the grenade, the main safety was released, starting the grenade's delay fuse that took 5 seconds to explode the powder. As we can see, the Mk2 was much safer than the German M24 grenade. It was impossible for the Mk2 to explode in your hand thanks to the safeties, and even once the pin of the first safety was removed, the grenade's ignition could be stopped by reinserting the pin. On the other hand, once the cord of the M24 is praised, if you don't throw the grenade, it's your end. A point in favor of the Mk2. Something curious that we can see about the M24 grenade is that at the end of the Second World War, the 43 would emerge, which was basically an M24 grenade, but that started from the top. The action system consisted of generating the top cover and then talking about it to start the wick. The retardant M43 would have copied the ignition design of the egg grenade to reduce costs in the production of the M24 grenade, which required extra machinery to hollow out the inside of the handle. In versatility, M24 had many advantages. Technically, being pure explosive, the M24 was much more versatile. For example, the Germans used to remove the sticks from 6 grenades and join them into one so that in this way they obtained what they called the concentrated charge. Obviously, it was very heavy, but it was a conventional explosive that served to destroy large obstacles, armored and to destroy bridges. Also, the same could be transformed into fragmentation grenades with casings that could be adapted so that these released a lot of shrapnel when exploding. And although the casing partially contained the explosion, it released shrapnel, just like an Mk2 for versatility. The M24 gains a point. If the M24 had a problem that was transportation, the huge stick that came out of them greatly hindered their transportation, which greatly limited the amount of grenades you could carry. The Allies could carry as many as they wanted since they fit in the pockets of their jackets and pants, while the Germans maybe carry 3 or 4 grenades in their belts or boots, or in fact, if you see videos or photos from the time, you will see the Germans carrying their grenades in quite strange places, obviously being very uncomfortable. This is a point in favor of the Mk2. The Soviets also had their own grenade very similar to the German one. Its handle was much shorter than the German M24, so it was easier to carry than the M24, but in turn it was also thrown further than the American Mk2. It also had a sleeve that surrounded it and transformed it into a fragmentation grenade, so we could say it was an intermediate between the German M24 grenade and the American Mk2. In conclusion, and answering the initial question of the video, was the German M24 grenade better than the Mk2? In my opinion, the American Mk2 was better than the German M24 grenade. The M24 grenade was better in most circumstances and seemed to be better adapted to the battlefields of that time. Even countries like Japan and China copied this design because it seemed much better and cheaper to produce than the Mk2, for example. However, these were somewhat unsafe. Progress ended up favoring safer and easier to transport grenades like the American Mk2 grenades, and as we see today, there are no grenades like the M24 because of this. However, tell me what you think. If you were in World War II, would you prefer to have M24 grenades or Mk2? Respond in the comments. See you next time. Goodbye.